Making a video. Yeah, so general subject of this guy and Pierrot's room and Holiday and whatever the other guy and the other guy. Just on this general subject of how we do this process of negotiating, as this guy would say, that we negotiate regarding reality. And he thinks of it more in terms of negotiating, trading your what you're going to take from the system, because it's all for your utility. But he makes so many arguments that are just so wrong. There was one part of the conversation where he had accused utilitarianism as being the justification for slavery, and it was just so, it's such an easy slander, and he keeps doing it with the, anybody who's bent towards anything Marxist. He always qualifies as Marxist, Stalinist, blah blah blah. But as soon as you say the word Marx, you're basically impugning the character of anybody who says anything negative about capitalism, because that's really all Marx did, was dissect the flaws of capitalism. But regardless, it's just such a a cheap way to argue. Guns against bows and arrows or something. I mean, there sort of has to be some sort of rules about how you're going to fight the fight. What kind of weapons are fair, and this guy just doesn't want to do that. And the fact that he was part of union negotiations and all that kind of stuff, they're probably the indication of why he doesn't think there's any ethical rules about negotiations. But anyway, that's another. That's my cheap shot. So anyway, so it's just all this kind of impugned character. So he uses this word tyranny all the time, and that was the joke of it. He, when pushed to explain the tyranny, explain how there's this direct line that's unavoidable, he can't do it, and especially he can't do it outside of a context that his own, let's all just make it up as a gang thing, isn't just as capable of being tyrannical in terms of not being respectful of the consequences. But again, so back to the utilitarian argument, but obviously utilitarians would find a lot wrong with slavery, because they're not just myopically saying what's in the best interest of the majority. That's not utilitarianism. They're measuring the absolute cost, not just the personal cost or the gang cost. And you're the one who's more likely to be guilty of trespasses against minorities, with your sense that might or majority makes right. So anyway, it's just like I said, it's just not a proper, decent way to argue philosophical concepts. So this negation of reality thing, is the real problem. I mean, you have to have a context for conversation, a context for the use of even language. So the context is that words are actually reasonable identifiers. When I say planet Earth, I don't have to qualify it by saying the mixture of atomic, chemicals and ultimately photons swirling about in location, blah blah blah, closely associated for the time period between now and blah blah blah, whatever. I mean, it's just silly to not just recognize the fact that matter does fall into identifiable conditions, and that we can place words on those conditions that the matter is in. And we can understand that those conditions are either, fundamentally stable, and they'll be around for a while, and then conditions that won't be around for a while. And we can have a conversation with a kind of common sense context that, this is where we are. We're on Earth, and in the year, 2015 by human counting, and this is where we've been, and this is where we're now, and there's these options for our future and these inevitabilities, and we can do this in some sort of rational way about where we are and what we're doing here. And instead they want to break any conversation that goes in any direction that they don't like, then they just start eliciting, well, the universe is just universing, and the universe is, you can't call that Earth, because that's not Earth. It's a bunch of swirling matter, and it's a bunch of atomic particles, and it's a bunch of photons, and again, so it's just such a it's such a cheat. As soon as you're losing an argument, you just break the structure of conversation. So he can use words like tyranny. If I use a word like imposition, all of a sudden the universe disappears, and there's nobody to impose upon, because nobody exists. I mean, it just doesn't. So when there's tyranny, there's somebody being tyrannical, but when there's imposition, apparently there's nobody being imposed upon. You know, it's just such an insanely, and I'll say it insane, it's an insanely duplicitous way to converse with the world. You know, it's just amazing that people put up with this. And because Piro is so glued to his make it up as you go along bullshit, he doesn't even recognize how dangerous this kind of person is, in the sense that he's not even recognizing that this guy will break any need for social justice, any need for you know, a fair or decent society or civilization that Piro seems to think is pretty necessary. And yet this guy will not, he won't have it. You won't have it. Okay, this guy won't create it. These kind of thinkers, because they're just looking out for themselves. And they will negotiate from their position of stolen power and be perfectly comfortable with that. Extortion is okay. So back to the utilitarian argument. Obviously, for a real utilitarian, there would be no value in catastrophic failure for some people, and you know, comfort, excessive comfort for others. That disproportion, that imbalance, would still, from a utilitarian point of view, be unacceptable. You know, reducing the number of by making the suffering more extreme would not be the utilitarian answer to a problem. So anyway, certainly wouldn't be a negative utilitarian, so that's for awful certain. And so he's not even arguing with the real argument, the real position of the people, so it's all straw men and scapegoats all over the place. So the thing I really want to get to is, you know, I guess, I mean, it seems kind of silly you'd have to diagram, you know, the rules of conversation, but this is what it basically is. We're having an argument, a trial of what is reality, right? Reality is being put on trial, and we're collecting the nature of our argument should be a collection of the evidence, and we're saying, you know, what is it, and can it be declared something? Innocent, guilty, right, wrong, left, right, blue, green. And I guess the context of the conversation is that it's somewhat important, that you do need some decisiveness to do anything right. I mean, if you're going to build a nuclear power plant and you're not sure whether you're building a nuclear power plant or a chicken coop, you might have a problem. You know, you might do something. There might be some silly things, you know, like nesting cages. You don't really want nesting cages in your nuclear power plant. I'm just saying, you know, you'll end up with something dysfunctional because you haven't committed to a reality. And without commitment to a reality, you can't have a commitment to a rational goal at all. So anyway, my argument obviously is that, you know, reality is well past provable with the evidence we have. We've collected a mass of evidence of what's going on in the universe, and yeah, it can be declared something. It can be convicted, yeah, of being made of matter, material, made of energy first. The energy condenses into what we call matter, and the matter and the energy obey rules that are not very yielding. You know, they are rigid, cause and effect. And you know, these people don't want that to be the condition of conversation. So they leave open, the trapdoor of, well, what about this matter that does this funky thing under these funky circumstances, and therefore there's a escape from all rational dissection of what the process of evolution is and how it developed our human consciousness. So all of a sudden that didn't happen. No, quantum mechanics does not change the fact of evolution, it does not change the fact of our function. Those things are not written by quantum mechanics, they're written, by the rules of a gladiator war, the rules of a fight for survival that took place over billions of years for all of life, and for 500 million years for neurological life, has been being redesigned to maximize performance as a survival machine. And that's our origin. That's the nature of our construction. And there aren't any magic bits. The bits that exist because they had an impact on survivability of our ancestry. There was function and purpose. And obviously, from a civilized organism's perspective, from one extracted from that really crude me first game, it's really easy to see that some of these mechanisms of our psychology and our biology are vestigial to civilization. They are not useful anymore. They're the tail we don't need that's wagging, the dog that needs to be smart. If that's a useful metaphor. The faculties that have use now are not cold-heartedness and brutality and bravery and macho and all these things are not what the human race needs. What the human race needs is a quiet brain that can do some thoughtful introspection and recognize, see past passions, and be able to practically assess the nature of the game we're playing, the nature of what we're heading for, and how the play is completely dependent on our progress. And there is progress as a understanding device, as something capable of looking and sensing and getting information and processing it rationally. The rational processing of the information that comes into us is not to say, I can't see anything. I'm a blind man touching an elephant. So that's the metaphor he's used multiple times, as if this is a profound insight into some sort of hastemic ignorance. So no matter how big a telescope we build, or no matter how precise a microscope we build, or no matter how many decades and centuries and millennia dedicated humans study reality with the deliberate effort to see more, we will never be able to see the elephant. We'll never be able to just stand back and see all the parts of the elephant. This is his argument, that somehow reality is eternally elusive. The reality elephant, so he would almost believe, I'd say, that he has as a belief, as a wish, as a hope, I don't even know what you would call it, something like we're only seeing some tip of some magical iceberg. So when we see the universe and we see supernova and crash and collision, when we see preposterous waste, no, that's just the tip of the iceberg. That's just the funky little part that hits the oxygen in the air. Now, if you look if you look underneath, you'll see the magical, beautiful crystal city or something that exists behind the universe. The wonderful purpose. Some kind of crap like that. And that's what Pierrot's clinging to, and it's just another form of religion. And so yes, they took out this psychotic deity. So they take out the humanist form that is doing its playing with pulling the wings off flies. That God with his magnifying glass burning the human ants. So they took the 5-year-old psychology out of religion and just replaced it with pretty, rainbow, blah, blah, blah stuff. Just whatever they can come up with as some sort of spiritual thingy. And said that that's the new God, the spiritual thingy that underlies the universe. And even though there's absolutely no real decent evidence of anything like that. So this sort of relates to my whole argument about physics and how it took a way wrong turn. When it assumed, because a couple of photons and a couple of experiments did something that appeared a little weird, all of a sudden photons have wings and are flying, and they're not little piglets anymore. But no, the truth is the photons are little piglets still, and they've totally misunderstood the dynamic, the physical dynamic that is how the universe works. And they will find no qubit magic. It doesn't exist, and they'll make nothing of it. But nothing useful in this wrong diagram of reality. And, it has this byproduct of just being totally caustic to philosophical discussion about reality, because people are just going to keep saying reality isn't reality, because photons aren't photons anymore. They're everywhere and nowhere and blah blah. They're little ghostons. So that's the new physics, and it's just a fundamental misunderstanding of a circumstantial observation. Sometimes things happen and they seem really, really coincidental or really, really weird, but we logically know that that's inevitable. The laws of probability dictate that every now and then some human's going to find out that they just married their sister or something, in some bizarre twist of bizarre fate. And it's just the way it's going to work out. It's going to happen. The preposterously improbable will happen inevitably. When you pull the arm on the bandit thing, okay, enough times, and the strangest shit can come up as a pattern, and it's just the way it is. Scientists should know that, and they should know that sometimes there's going to be phenomenon that are going to look one way, and it's going to match so well. It's just going to be saying to you, "That's a zebra. That's a zebra," and you're just going to find out it's a giant rat that just looks like a zebra. There's probably something we can find like that, some little marsupial or some little animal. You could almost say like panda bears. They're not really bears, they're raccoons, right? So, somehow they came out looking like a bear. They look kind of beary, but no, they're really raccoons, So they're kind of a long way away from a bear. I mean, it's not like they're not related, they're on the same branch of the tree and all that kind of crap. But it isn't as close as it looks, and you could say the same thing about, other organisms that are they come out in the end looking similar, but they got there through a whole different chain of events, and you can't draw the wrong assumptions. And so science, like I said, should have, you would think it would be a little more durable in terms of not overreacting and not being too presumptive, and then building a whole giant edifice of science on top of wrong presumptions, very weak presumptions of entanglement and this whole wave theory of photon migration through the universe. The photons are not waves. They have no wave character. It's just wrong. Anyway, but that's a separate subject. But like I said, it ends up related to the subject of philosophy now, just because the mistakes of science have now leaked into philosophy and are creating mistakes now in philosophy, where people are not being reasonable and not recognizing, not only first finding this whole excuse to be very fudgy about evolution creating anything, and people will start talking, no offense meant to certain individuals, but they'll start talking about consciousness being some dimensional level that we're tapping into, that it's actually some dimension in the universe, the conscious dimension, and that it's not just some illusion created in a neural network in our brain for the purpose of creating really kind of disgusting behavior. Penis and vagina. That's what it's there for. That's what all this shit is here for. It's just to figure out clever ways, to accomplish really crude task, which is steal the banana from the baby, and stick your banana, and that's about all there is, and this whole fantasy theory of this universe behind the universe that we're not seeing is just an excuse to go on silly storytelling, to just prance around reality in any kind of pink dress you wish to wear, any flavor of the day kind of thing. You feel like a flavor of Kool-Aid or something. Kool-Aid, probably a good metaphor. Drink whatever bullshit you feel is good for you, and having no responsibility to acknowledge and take responsibility for the facts of our existence, which are that our existence has been insanely expensive in terms of how many organisms have been ground up to create our form and our shape, and that our civilization is insanely expensive in terms of the amount of lives that are destroyed like slaves for the purpose of this game you're playing, this protected class game you're playing. So they find ways to evade taking responsibility for the real price paid for this indulgence with this fantasy notion that your consciousness is challenging, channeling, the megaberg under the sea of the universe, the mega universe underneath the little crappy universe we see. You're all channeling the megaverse, and just aggrandizing and embiggenizing your egos in the process. But it's not philosophy. So again, the rudiments of philosophy is the function of language, and the logic is just built in to the establishment of the words, the identifiers. The identifiers are just modeled, they're representations of reality. So I could just say that, this thing will just make it represent trees. And so we just put it in a category. Okay, when you see this, that means tree. Well, for us it's the word tree or the sound tree. I'm just saying all it is a thing, and we're just saying this. When you see this, this represents that. And you can see that in your own brain. I say words, images come to mind. Okay, you could do it. You do it all the time. You have a static representation for bottle, glass, jar. All these things have visual representations, or at least experiential ones. Personal experience with the thing. So you know what these things are in general, and that we generally can have agreement about the basic nature of these things without arguing about, micrometers of distance or something, and saying, well, that's invalidated because it's 1/1,000,000th of a micrometer different in size, and therefore it's not the same thing. Now it's not a cup of coffee because it's a zillionth of a micrometer of a gram more or something. I mean, it's just silly. It would be silly. It is silly to have conversation in that context, because we do know that most of these words are fairly reliable. Lots of them are conceptually broken in terms of how we really measure scale things. Big versus small. These are all things that need a relative context. And significance is also probably another one of these things where, things get lost, because people they'll turn the word suffering into a stub toe, for the purpose of a conversation all of a sudden. suffering is stubbed toes, and you're like, well, that's not really a representation of suffering. I mean, is that the generic representation? Is that the mean representation? Or is that just a completely silly representation for that word? And so those kinds of little cheats in the conversation are which just degrade it and spiral it into dirt. You just end up in a pointless conversation as soon as you start breaking what the word means. And all of a sudden, tree means ornamental tree in Japan when you were thinking redwood. So that's not going to work. So the changing of language, changing of contextual meaning of words, all of that these are just ways of breaking the game, so you can't really have a discussion about what we can talk about in terms of the reality we exist in. We can't have a rational trial anymore because they keep changing the subject. It's no longer about the thing on trial. It's about magical worlds that don't exist. So where else to go with this? So yeah, I guess you have to start with some sort of simple diagram and then just keep pointing out as soon as somebody's off the diagram, as soon as somebody's breaking the conceptual rules here, which is words have meaning. Sometimes they need to be qualified. You need to be explicit in how you phrase your sentences and phrase your arguments, so you make sure it's understood what the evidence is. That you don't overstate or understate the evidence. That you fairly describe the circumstance. You could take a circumstance like Fukushima, and you could say, yes, it's difficult to fairly describe the magnitude of it, what it really represents as an example of human oops, human error, where it is on the scale of all human errors. It'd be hard to get this to say that explicitly, but you could certainly know what fair and unfair is. It would certainly be unfair to describe it in any kind of trivial language, because it's far from trivial, and it may be far from the worst human mistake ever. But it does illustrate that some circumstances are going to be a little difficult to describe accurately and completely, recognizing the context, that you're not just describing something that has four sides. It's not an easy shape to describe. It's not a octagon. You just say octagon. It's a thing with lots of facets to it. So, but we still know that we can be explicit and say it's a thing this big. There's lots of explicitity to be grabbed. There's lots of specific and accurate statements that can be made about our reality, and I think a list of them would include something like, yes, we're created, we are built by evolution, and that evolution has these certain mechanical rules, and that one of the rules isn't make phantasmagorical happy creatures. That's not what evolution's doing, or has done. And create consciousness. That's not evolution's purpose. It's a byproduct of evolution, not a product. So that's certain bits of context that we can have some list of statements about this is the context of our reality, and that all like certain statements that, generally speaking, there's 99.9% of our scientific investigation reveals a crude, mechanical, cause and effect system. And it's only a small percentage of what we understand or what we observe as effects that remain mysterious and that leave us with a remaining paradox or something that needs more investigation. So we have answered a lot of questions, I guess is my point. We do know why we see rainbows. We do know. We've answered a lot of questions about the mechanics of our existence, the mechanics of the planet, the mechanics of the weather, the mechanics of our psychology, the mechanics of our function, lots of this stuff we have thoroughly investigated, and we have come up with reasonable explanations, theories of function that are consistent with very big piles of evidence confirming them. And it's only a small percentage of our investigations that seem still wanting, and all that. So anyway, probably enough. No point in there's a point, but the real point is going to be is that there's going to have to be some sort of unfortunately, our conversation philosophically is going to have to get regimented. We're going to have to join some sort of military style philosophy, where you're really going to have to follow some rules, and you're really going to have to do this procedure thing, and you just can't do this. I'm just going to keep making shit up and changing the subject and changing the identity, the meaning of words. It's just not. There's no function to it. You're breaking the function of our intelligence. Our intelligence has no expression outside the context of a fair trial, outside the context of fair use of language. And this isn't a trial anymore. It's just a show. I mean, you're show philosophers. It's a show trial of reality. It's a mockery of a trial, and of facts. And it's a mockery to the capacity of our brains to do logic, to reason well, and to draw sensible conclusions, appropriate conclusions. And again, that's another fundamental argument. These people think there's nothing we can be conclusive about, nothing important. That's the trick, right? All the unimportant things, they think we got we're really solid on all the unimportant things. And it just coincidentally happens to be all the important things, where we don't have a clue all of a sudden. And I think that's just nonsense. I think we know rape be bad, okay? We know lots of things. And these people will pretend, that he makes up the universe. That his perversion of the context of our knowledge, his twisting, of Saturn out of its Saturnness. All of a sudden, the rings are not rings, they're whatever, lines that go crookedy. They're crooked lines. It's mass is not mass because there's a bunch of little particles. It just doesn't. What's the point? There's just no point. He's just going to take away its identity. If the implications of Saturn being Saturn is, he's obligated to compromise one of his indulgences. So I think that's probably enough now. So I don't know where. What I'm basically arguing is that yes, outside the context of some sort of, I guess we're going to have to write premises, and we're going to have to establish rigidity to acceptance of them, and just say, look, we just can't talk about it. If you're not even willing, for the sake of the argument, to demonstrate me wrong, you have to demonstrate me wrong on some real thing. You have to actually demonstrate where I made a wrong conclusion. And if you can't do that, there's no point in arguing with me, saying in some vague way, well, I have twisted every one of those conclusions into mush, and therefore that's why I don't believe it. Well, of course you don't believe it, because you don't believe in anything that premises the argument. And all of those reasonable premises, if you're not going to accept them, what's the point of a conversation? If you don't accept evolution, cold, cruel, crude evolution as the origin of your existence, then yeah, we probably don't have too much to talk about. Because what's your alternative theory? Some kind of iceberg that we don't see called Jehovah or something, right? It's got to be some sort of religious mumbo-jumbo. But if you accept evolution as the source of our identity, of our construction, of our form, that has a ton of implications about what the nature of our psychology is, and that what part of us should be running the show, the civilized, intelligent thing, or the stupid, squeaky, horny mouse thing. And I think those kind of answers are obvious. Civilization would obligate crocodiles to be civilized. Anything that has the attribute of intelligence is obligated to respect it. It doesn't matter what it is. Cockroach, assassin bug, rhinoceros, it doesn't matter what animal I would give enlightenment to in terms of understanding the bigger picture. The fact is, it would have to be civilized by that understanding out of being what it is. Its past identity is no longer relevant. The only thing relevant is, what does the intelligence say I should be? I have to conform to a different game because I'm not a dumb animal anymore. Dumb animals play dumb games. Smart animals have to play smart games. That's just a fact. That's just an obligation of the fact of your intelligence. And these people don't want to do that. They want to use their intelligence as a tool for the beast. They just want to hand the beast the brain hammer. You know, a brain that's just a better hammer to smash, take what they want. They don't understand that, no, the brain creates the obligation of use, of rational use, and obligates you to see the true context of your identity, which is a bastard creation of little merit. Anyway, yeah. The point is, we're doing this wrong, and if we're ever going to get anywhere, we're going to get any traction in this philosophical argument, we've got to have philosophical arguments confined by rules, where you can't just change magically, just right on the board of the trial, you know, however you want to metaphor this idea of putting the truth on trial. You can't just pretend that oh, well, that witness, that I don't like that witness, throw that one out. You can't just play this game where you didn't hear the evidence. You can't just keep disqualifying the truth with some catch-22, with some gimmick. And as long as that's going to take place, yeah, there's no function. It's a show trial. It's not a rational, reasonable, effective, potentially effective, useful interaction. It's a waste of frickin' time. But it's the kind of waste he wants because it's to his advantage. He's a genericist. He's a standard human, bug, and he wants to keep it a bug planet. He doesn't want civilization to win because it's anti-bug. So anyway, just the truth. Anti-pest, vermin, blight. Yeah, he's just a generic blighticist. So yes, it's to his advantage to maintain the status quo of a silly optimism. And so that's why he's so generous to religious theory. It's because every part of it is exactly what he wants people to be, controlled by nonsense, except for the silly, dogmatic God part, because he knows that's ridiculous. Too ridiculous. The whole thing is ridiculous, but that just makes it too ridiculous. So he's just going with it's much more reasonable to have the real universe is the bottom of the iceberg kind of theory of God, rather than something explicit. Because if you make an explicit statement about a supernatural hero being, well, then you have to have evidence and all that stuff. But if you just imply that there's a universe under the universe, it just makes it so much easier to say prove there isn't. where you can logically prove why an intelligent God wouldn't torture all women for eternity for the sins of one woman. You can understand how that's not rationally intelligent. You can't say the same for an iceberg, because you don't know what the hell an iceberg's values would be. But anyway, you probably understood. Well, you might have understood that. It wasn't very well said. But anyway, enough. So, until next time. Such.